Hey all. For anyone that's joined a little bit early, I'm going to go off camera for a second, but we'll try to get started as close to the top of the hour as we can. Thanks. Hey all, it's top of the hour. Gonna give a couple of minutes for everyone to keep filtering in, and then we will dive right in. But for anyone that's joining us or already online and you're in the StreamYard platform, don't hesitate to leave comments. I'll try to address those as we go. Want this to be as conversational as possible. I realize it's a bit of a one way, but I'll be reading the comments and making sure I can kind of chat through anything that comes up. And then anyone that's kind of logging in from a different platform or YouTube, feel free to leave comments as well. I should also receive those. But yeah, gonna give it 1 or 2 minutes, and we'll try and get started maybe a couple minutes past the hour. Thanks. All right, gonna give it about 1 more minute. Looks like we're coming up on kind of where I expected. So about a minute left, and we'll get started. But hello for anybody here already, and excited to kind of chat through some microlearning. And that'll do it. We'll get started. Hey everyone, pleasure to be here with you today and talk through some microlearning. I'm going to switch over here in a second to a slide deck, run through some tips, but I will say it again, this will be recorded and uploaded to our resource page at WeVideo for anybody at a future state that would like to kind of look through and review some of what we talk about today. And then certainly I'll be monitoring the chats and the comments throughout. Please don't hesitate, drop some comments in. I'm always happy to stop. This is a smaller, more intimate gathering today, which I'm excited about. It hopefully means we can have some dialogue and go back and forth with some of the challenges we're facing in the workforce, both from a perspective of what we're seeing on the WeVideo side with some of our customers, and then also some of my own background in a kind of a services-led business. So with that said, I am going to toggle over and share this deck. And then once we get past the introduction, I'll probably minimize myself to the corner as well, and we'll just go right into the content. But my name is Preston Hull. So I'm an enterprise account executive here at WeVideo. So I primarily focus on bringing our set of solutions into the market in a more corporate business setting. So traditionally, WeVideo has really focused on higher education and really enhancing that learner experience for anyone and everyone that's trying to learn in a virtual and an asynchronous way. And then in the corporate side of the house, employee and workforce training, internal and external, making sure that we can really maximize how companies train and deliver content to their different teams is my focus here. Prior to WeVideo, I actually led a department at a startup that did contract negotiation, and I'll lean on that a little bit today, but I had a team of about 65 people across the states, and our primary challenge was how do we train individuals in a consistent, repeatable way so that they can go out and be the face of the business and conduct their business and their expectations in a consistent, repeatable way. So I've dabbled myself in a good bit of enablement on trying to figure out the best way to reach your target audience. And, hopefully, again, some of the tips and the ideas that we're going to walk through today, I'll lean on some of that experience along with what we're seeing with our current customers. And I guess, it's worth pointing out, I am in a demographic of kind of what the new workforce looks like. So, how to reach, how to resonate, how to make sure some of the content that's being put together best resonates with this new target demographic. Hopefully I can shed some light on as well. Today, we'll go through those challenges in the workforce, have some stats and some things that we're starting to see, and kind of why I think microlearning really ties into that really, really cleanly. We'll look a quick look at what microlearning is. I'm sure many of you on the call know what microlearning is, but we'll look at it at least to kind of set the ground or set the framework of what we're going to talk about. And then we'll dive into the strategies and tips, how to make sure the content is as applicable to the role as possible, the ideal time frame and the way you want to deliver some of that content. And then, next steps, I'm going to open it up to the floor, but I'll say it again for anyone trickling in. Never hesitate to throw some comments or some questions into the chat. I know this is carved out for a full hour, the irony of which it won't take a full hour to talk through microlearning. So there'll be ample time to kind of go back and forth. So if there are comments and we need to kind of take a pause and dive into a specific area, let's do it. With that, I'm going to minimize myself a little bit more. So the workforce today, and like I said, workforce training is changing. It's changing from, I think, a couple different areas, and I think the spread of remote work is accelerating some of that. But time constraints, and it's partly to do with the way I believe, companies are hiring and what I'm seeing in hiring trends, but it's a lot of backfill driven, and backfill means that there's work waiting to be done, which means time to productivity needs to be super, super fast. Individuals starting into roles and individuals trying to kick off new jobs, their expectation is to get into the role and get into the role quickly to start driving value for the business. So that's a limited amount of time that you can really train and enable that team to feel like they're well equipped to go out and do the role. So time constraints for the employee, being able to allocate, onboarding expectations of the new role and getting started as quickly as possible is really driving changes in how training is happening. Changing demographics, newer, younger generations, it's a much more rapid, and they expect content to be more digestible. It's the nature of social media. It's, quicker attention span. Something that mirrors that in the working environment is something that we're seeing a lot of success with some of our customers that are realizing you need to meet some of your learners and your employees where they are. So being able to say, here's how you digest content. Let me put content in front of you that actually meets some of those criteria is really driving some success. And that's, again, microlearning encompasses a lot of that. Of it's engaging, it's quick, it's able to really meet those individuals in a time frame that they have available, one, and two, they want to actually view. Engagement, this is a tough one. I think there's a myriad of factors that go into this, but engagement's just seeing low across a variety of industries. We look in, the medical space, the healthcare space, a lot in the tech space, and then the fast casual food service. And through all that, 34% of employees are qualifying as engaged by those criteria. Now, I'm not going to say that an engaging training platform will necessarily correct all of those different variables, but getting them involved and getting them really entrenched in the culture of the business and the company at the start and making them feel like they're bought in through some engaging training can absolutely set them in the right direction to feel like anything that follows that training, whether it's current onboarding or kind of continued education, they feel like they're part of that business and they've got some buy-in. And the last thing that's changed, retention and application. This is for the employer. This is, is the content doing what it was supposed to be doing? I think, I referenced that I was at a startup previous where I had to train, a bunch of remote teams. And, my big question was always, is it working? I've put a lot of work into the content. There's a lot of effort going into the training and the structure. Is it doing what I wanted it to do? And that's important, especially as companies are looking at, where they allocate their resources and where they put their efforts into. Being able to point to a strong business case and say, this is what we did, this is how it was measured, and this is where the impact was, is especially important. And with microlearning, there are opportunities to add in analytics and viewership kind of statistics that drive some of that business ROI. So what is microlearning? Kind of self-explanatory in the title, but microlearning delivers bite-sized content in short bursts. The approach emphasizes concise, targeted learning, and it's designed to address specific objectives or skill gaps. directly what's on the screen. Again, I know that's a bit self-explanatory, but microlearning at its core is taking traditionally what's been a pretty robust curriculum and not doing away with that entire curriculum, but breaking it up into more bite-sized pieces so that it resonates and it's able to build upon each other. How the content is consumed is changing. We've touched on that, in the workforce challenges, but meeting those learners where they are, they expect to look at content and say, I can look at this, I can understand it, I can do it quickly. And I feel like this content builds upon the next content, builds upon the next content. So it's not as much a dismantling of what already exists in curriculum, but it's a refocusing of how you create the content for training and also how you deploy it. So taking, the end goal, knowing what makes up that end goal and what kind of different building blocks need to be in place. The micro learning is to focus on the building blocks. And then when it's all put together, those building blocks make up the whole. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. And again, it's as you think through some of these examples, I want you to think through your content. If you're starting out from scratch and you need to really create content, think how you can set it up to eventually have a lot of different micro learning segments that make up your entire curriculum. If you already have a robust library of content, we're going to look at that a little bit, but it does not mean you need to restart and rebuild the wheel. It just means how do you take that content and redeliver it in a way that best meets your employee base and really resonates and gets them where they need to be. And why is it important? Again, flexibility, engagement, retention, and accessibility. We'll go through all these in a little bit more detail, but giving them content that they can actually use. The whole goal of this is to make them as productive as possible. I say that to mean you want your content to actually do what it's intended to do. A lot of work and effort goes into putting together training programs. So taking it and applying it in a way that they can actually learn and then apply in their day-to-day jobs, that's what matters. So the flexibility to give it to the different teams, engagement from that team so they really know that they're using a lot of the content that you've made. And then retention of that knowledge and accessibility, it brings more people in, which makes everyone a little bit more productive and a little bit more accountable as they go into their roles. All right, so some tips, one thing at a time. Micro learning at its core is meant to be small and bite-sized. So making sure the learning objectives are really, really clear for each piece is crucial. Now, that doesn't mean to necessarily, break it up into too many segments, but the analogy I sometimes use is driving a car. You don't need to have a micro learning segment on like walking to the car or opening the door, but you would want to have a micro learning on familiarizing yourself with the vehicle. Where is everything? What are all the different, the mirrors, the doors, the locks? And the next micro learning segment might be turning it on, putting it into gear. So it's not single, but it's definitely what's the first idea you're trying to accomplish, and then make that your focus. So it's meant to not overcomplicate. You can create complex trainings made up of micro learning segments, but when you're thinking through what is your end goal, what's the desired goal, there's likely a lot of different pieces and components that make that up. Break it up into those pieces and components so that it's easier to say, here's where the break is. If you look at the end goal of driving a car, we'll go back to that analogy, and someone's not driving a car very well. If you've only trained on driving a car as your main core concept, it's going to be very challenging to necessarily understand where the breakdown is happening. Do they know how to put it in drive? Do they know how to use their mirrors? Are they speeding? Like there's so many pieces of a complex idea. It actually benefits a lot of times the employer to say, oh, here's what the breakdown is. It looks like I'm training on these 6 components that make up my complex idea. These are the 2 that there's been a bit of a sticking point. And then you actually have some clarity and some insight into where to put your resources for follow-up content, or kind of what your hiring profile looks like if that's something that you need. But focusing on one thing at a time, the single goal, single outcome, it makes a single success. And then again, that's what makes up a cohesive program over time. Short and tangible. Kind of back to the no-brainer side of things, but micro learning in its nature is pretty short. It's 8 minutes, I would say, is probably what I most typically see. I'll lean on my own personal side of the house. When I'm looking up on YouTube, like training videos, like how to do a project around the house or really anything at all, if it's over 8 minutes, I'm not watching it, because typically I'm in a rush. I'm trying to figure out like how to do something. I've got to really figure out what do I need quickly, and can I pull it off myself? That's the time frame that we're looking for. And it just makes sure that it can be consumed. I mean, I've talked to many coworkers and some of our prospective customers and our current customers that are struggling with, they get workers to the door, they get them started, and there's this huge lag time between productivity and start date. And I actually ironically think that longer content and really, really intensive onboarding programs sometimes can delay, because you're always going back and wondering, where was that content that I looked at, or where was that training module, or I'm forgetting half of what I learned. But by breaking up in these short pieces, one, you can actually kind of get a head start as you're starting a company or a new job and say, oh, I know how to do this. Like, I feel like more comfortability going into day 1 or day 10 or whatever, journey that might be. It also creates a repository, or a library rather, of content they can look back to, for continuing education or, refreshers, anything like that. When it's broken up into these different pieces, it's a little bit easier to decipher and also go back to and reference. I talked at the beginning that no matter where, this group today on the webinar is in their enablement journey, it doesn't mean you're necessarily out of luck on the microlearning. I've seen plenty of customers that they don't have any microlearning content, and they have a lot of 20, 30-minute videos they've been using for training already. That is 100% okay. It is design. Microlearning can kind of come in multiple forms. It can be the content itself that's broken up into pieces. You can absolutely take a 20-minute video and then break that off into pieces as well. So maybe the first 3 minutes of the video is just an introductory to a concept. There it is. That's your microlearning segment. Point your learners toward that first 3-minute piece. Here at PlayPosit or revideo, obviously our PlayPosit module allows you to put an interactivity in each bit, so you can break up longer chunks if that's a direction you'd like to go. And we'll talk about interactivity here in a second. But it's worth pointing out that you're not constrained to not leverage microlearning just because your video content is longer. So take what you have and then maybe storyboard and say, of this video that's a little bit longer, how can we break this up to be a little more tangible for our end learners? And then go about it that way. And that, again, it doesn't necessarily solve for the repository of media, but it does allow you to say, I don't have to recreate everything I have. And then maybe over time, as you're creating new content, you can focus on the smaller pieces that are more digestible. But the end goal is not to create more work for those deploying training. It's to take what you have and then make sure it resonates with the end audience. So if you're starting from scratch, I would recommend making some of these into smaller, more tangible pieces without overwhelming your learners. If you don't have that, just take what you have and really break down exactly what type of content you want them to be learning from that video, and then break it into, I'll put in quotes, micro learning segments of that longer video. All right, make it relatable. This will be, again, kind of in that same vein as the last tip. You have a really exciting opportunity for personalizing a lot of your content. So if you're making something new, and we have several customers that are in the fast casual restaurant space. So they're training a variety of different roles, from frontline staff that are in the drive-through line, inside of the cash register, all the way to the corporate space where it's more of an internal role. You have the chance to personalize each of these. Training sometimes is not a one-size-fits-all type model. It's what does someone in the drive-through line really go through that makes it specific to their role, that you as the content creator are able to go and capture and then put into these micro-learning segments. It's an exciting chance to, one, meet the learners where they are from, like, what kind of content they want to consume, but also make it what really relates to them. Your learner experience best, but taking small bite-sized stories to make sure the individual watching the training can really resonate and say, that's my job. I can see myself in that position, or that's our cash register. Or even on some of the internal corporate side, this is a scenario that's very specific to something that we come across day in, day out. Having a multimedia approach and having that broken up into video pieces that really allow a learner to say, I can see myself in this. I know what I'm meant to do. And I'm actually able to demonstrate that through some of the training that I'm taking. It just becomes a little bit more successful and better knowledge retention. I've got a couple stats there on the right side of the screen that, Boston University did a big study on kind of what makes content stick the most. One is the multimedia content itself. It's just seeing it and visualizing it. You can take complex ideas and really visually understand what you're trying to demonstrate. but it's also, it's the content itself. If I'm, I'll point back to kind of my time of training a services team. We were doing contract negotiations. And if I was trying to train them just on general communication, but I didn't apply it, or I didn't put it in the framework of how you would negotiate a contract, it doesn't negate the value of that content necessarily, but it does make it a little bit harder for that learner to make the leap. So if you can limit the leap as much as possible and say, not only is this what I'd like you to learn, but it's in an environment and I've demonstrated kind of what it will look like on your day-to-day, it'll just make it a little bit more impactful to the employee. And then most importantly, which is kind of the undercurrent of all of these different slides, is it will allow them to be more productive in their role, because there's just less of that knowledge gap of, okay, I watched a training, it was kind of on this, how does this apply to my day-to-day? There's really no gap at all. I've seen this, I've seen it in the video, it was quick, I was able to assess my understanding of it, and now I'm in the job and I'm actually doing it. With the variety of smartphones and webcams and all the different tools that are available to capture content, there's really no reason to not have tailored, personalized content for all of your training programs, if possible. That's actually, before I jump to the next slide, I know I touched on this in the last slide a little bit, but I'm never the mentality of starting from scratch if you have a lot of content. If you do have training programs that are not necessarily as personalized as you'd like, use the interactive portions when you kind of break it up, or kind of like how you assess the skills. And again, the WeVideo side of the house, we're huge believers in embedding some of that interactivity into the video content to give you real-time feedback of what the learner is going through. It can also be used as an opportunity to, personalize. There isn't personalization in the video itself. So the video is about maybe a generic topic, how to communicate. Use the skills assessments, use some of the supporting documentation to personalize it and better reach that audience. So it's not about starting from zero. It's just about either building the direction you want to go, or taking the content that you have and trying to apply it and adapt it to make it smaller, shorter, and more impactful. That's where you're going to see the most success. All right, I'm going to hide my face because this slide is a little bigger than my face is allowing. But this is kind of the bedrock of the WeVideo and PlayPosit module side of the house, is that interactivity and that involvement and getting them engaged. But it really is, the stats speak to themselves. Your cognitive processes are triggered when you're actively engaging with the content, which, if you're doing it, you remember it, just like anyone that's done any kind of motor skills activity, like going through that motion, practicing that, practice makes perfect. The saying has some merit, but that's when you get them involved. That can happen in a remote environment with training. We're seeing 2 times more engagement than static content for video. And then, anyone that's using video and interactive especially is seeing about a 20 to 25% increase in productivity for their teams. So back to that very first slide of workforce challenges and kind of the challenges that most employers are seeing is how to get their employees better engaged. Part of it is getting them involved with the content that the company is putting out. I know we've got a wide audience today of a couple different industry types, but everyone here is putting a lot of effort into their content and trying to make it, a really solid training program to get the productivity they want out of their teams. Making the interactivity a big part of that content actually allows you to demonstrate it and prove it. And that's again, where any microlearning at all, it's half the battle is making it relatable and making it accessible to your new employers and making it a way that they can really see it quickly. The other big battle is making sure it actually resonates. So the interactivity is one, to make sure they're proving the skills that they've gained by going through these different pieces of content in the training program. But as you're thinking about putting interactivity in, regardless of the tool or the platform, think through what you'd like to be able to measure from the content that you have in place. If you need to know, what was the reception from this? Put in some feedback, put in a poll at the end. If you need to know, are they really struggling with, I'll go back to the fast food restaurant example. Are they struggling at the cash register, or are they struggling with putting the orders, like the to-go orders, together? Make those different pieces what you judge through your interactivity. And then, one, you're having your programs do what they're intended to do. But then on the back end, you have the data and the analytics to prove to the business, this is what's working. This is where we'd like our resources to go. I realize this is not always just apply to microlearning. This same practice of using interactivity to both do skills assessments, but also, strengthen business cases internally for why training matters and where it's making the most impact to business KPIs. But with microlearning, especially because it's a little bit shorter, it's a little bit less traditional across the workforce. As it becomes more prevalent, I think that won't be the case. But for now, it's just like a newer approach. You're going to want to make sure you've got the statistics to back up kind of what you're doing. So again, as you're looking at your content, the tip and the recommendation I would make is a healthy mix of skills assessments for your interactivity, but then also skills assessments that can be used to say, they learn this in X amount of time, therefore our time to value is shorter by X%. And that's why, we want to put this type of training program into place for a new department or a new wing, or during a merger and acquisition, be able to show that scalability. So realize I spent a little bit of time on this slide in particular, but again, I'll keep highlighting, these stats. They are evident, with our customers that are using interactivity heavily now. And then, I think back to my own experience of, I would deploy training, just a Zoom video. I would send it out, I'd do a session, I'd record it, I'd send it out to the team. I had absolutely no idea if people were watching it. I just didn't. I didn't know where the misses were. I didn't necessarily know if they were even enjoying some of the trainings being sent out. And I think what was missing was obviously, one, the skills assessment piece to show that the trainings were actually doing something to improve kind of their deliverables as a services team. But then also for myself, I had a hard time getting a feedback loop to know what on earth, they like to hear about, and the format of that. And we could obviously capture it in different ways, but if you can bring them together and you can create interactivity that also guides the business, that's where the magic happens. So with microlearning, a lot more chances to bring that in, in those quick videos. But as you put in skills assessments, just, the thing I'll keep saying over and over is think through, one, what you want to be able to have your employees prove that they know, but then two, what you as a trainer want to be able to know, to guide, your content creation and kind of what resourcing you put behind enablement in general. All right, I'm popping myself back up. I think my head's small enough for this one. On the go, we've talked a lot about the content. We've talked a lot about how to make some of this applicable to a new employee workforce. Anytime you can make something mobile friendly, it's better. So, making the content resonate, making it personalized, making it interactive, that's all fantastic. That kind of next level up, if you can make it mobile friendly, so you can take it on your phone, that's just going to reach a wider audience. And it's not just employees that are in a more on their feet, or, we work across, some manufacturers and construction industries that are using this for compliance-based training. It's not just those individuals that are needing something on their phone. I'll use myself just on a personal note. I will sometimes sit on my laptop, and if I can take a mobile module, I will. I don't know why that is. There could be studies down the line that maybe show that, but I think making it accessible where the learner wants it, where the learner can take it, where they're not constrained to say, I have to do this. It's more like, great, I get to go through this training. I get to watch these quick bursts. I get to learn the content that I need for my role, and I can do it in a way that's really easy for me to access. It's just going to be that final piece that takes your content, levels it up, but also reaches the widest audience. I think from who I saw join today, there's many of us that are working in heavily remote settings. Those settings, you never know the time zones of the people taking it. Maybe they're, sitting at a coffee shop. Maybe they're in transit, on the subway. Allowing those individuals to accelerate their own training to feel like they're more productive in that job. It's gonna all drive. I keep kind of referencing that very, very first slide. Is one, the time constraints of taking training in general are kind of eliminated when you put it into a mobile setting, and then two, those engagement stats of how engaged employees are feeling. Allowing them to take this, through the method that they'd like to engage with, which a lot of times is the mobile phone. It's just going to make them a little more engaged. It's going to increase the culture. Like I said, I don't want to pretend that microlearning is going to improve every single aspect of the business, but it's that first touch point that so many employees have. And then it's also how they feel like they're improving and the company is investing in them is the training that they get. So delivering it to them in a way that they feel like, wow, This got me where I needed to be. It was through a method that I actually enjoyed. It was personalized for my role. It just all adds up and accumulates into a pretty great employee experience, which, is the goal for everybody on this call. All right, I'm going to try a feature of StreamYard and see if it works, but I'm going to throw out some of these questions. And if you are in the chat and want to drop it in, I think I'll get it as a personal note. Is anyone using microlearning today? And I realize as I drop this question out, that might be a one-sided question of a yes or a no. I'm seeing a few yeses, a few nos. I'm going to actually go ahead and skip to the next question because it's a little bit less binary and more of like a dialogue. But here we go. Existing content. Yeah. So for anyone that's listening in, a comment of a hurdle, which I know we touched on a little bit, was, existing content's a little bit dated. So, personalization and mobile friendliness and kind of putting in that interactivity can be a challenge when you've got a library of content that's a little bit dated. The two recommendations I would have is don't feel constrained by the existing content that you have. If you have dated content, that's okay. Your interactivity or your skills assessments or just the way you segment out that content to the teams can be adjusted to be a little bit better suited for microlearning. So I'm going to make a intuitive leap here and say maybe your content is from an earlier stage of the business. Some of the processes have changed, but the underlying piece, is still important, and that's what you're trying to train on. Outline that as your learning objective at the start. So if we go back to the first slide, which was, or the first tip, which was, single point of focus, list out all the topics that are in that more dated content. Look at exactly the pieces that you want to train on, and then put that as your learning objective at the start so that the learner knows maybe this is dated, maybe this is older, but this is what I'd like you to get out of this. This is, we've looked at it, we've assessed, we're not just throwing you through the same training we've been throwing for the last 10 years. We want you to get this out of this content. And then as they watch, that's what they'll pick up on. And again, if you can break that up into smaller chunks and take some of that older video and make it just smaller and easier to digest, the reception of it will just be a lot better. So my recommendation is just to outline the learning objectives, keep it simple, those single topics, and then break it up where you can. And then, over time, if you can recreate and refresh, at least it will give you a little bit more insight into what you want to refresh and kind of what content, needs to be refreshed. Cool. Good contribution. Thank you. I'm going to skip to the last. I'd be remiss, we're passionate about video in general. We're passionate about video being the best delivery method for, any kind of learning at all. Our background and a big portion of our customers, like I said, I'm more in the corporate and the business space and kind of how to best maximize video in a more traditional corporate setting. But, higher education, K-12, they're all really heavily leveraging video today. That was absolutely accelerated during the pandemic, where learning needed to be done in a remote way, and the corporate scene followed suit, as we all know. So when you're looking at your tech stack and you're looking at your tool set needed, the two pieces that I think are most important is you've got to have a way to capture the content in a way that resonates. So whether it's, mobile capture of video or being able to do a screen kind of presentation like this, where you share and you really connect with your final audience, that's crucial. Even if you have existing material and you have existing video, you're always going to want to refresh. Things change, acquisitions, new product lines. I mean, there's so many reasons why you would want to make sure you've got the flexibility to create video quickly in a standardized way that can match or meet your training needs. And then, the interactivity piece is where we see the most success with corporations trying to pull in their employees and also demonstrate that the training they're putting out is actually getting them where they need to be. Having a tool that allows you to introduce some of that interactivity, it just makes sure that all the efforts you're putting into your training programs are working. If you don't have that, or you're kind of looking for a way to create interactivity light, so to speak, making sure, you've got ways to track who's taking the skills assessments and when, I think is probably the best workaround. If you're sending it out and you don't have a complete feedback loop, you don't really know how that content is landing. So I know I used a story from my old role where I would send out Zoom recordings and I had no idea kind of what the impact would be. It would have had to be accompanied with a poll or some kind of assessment. So I could say, send you the content, show that you watched it. Bringing those two together, it's a better streamlined experience, which is, kind of our bread and butter and our belief here at WeVideo and PlayPosit. But, as long as you're making sure you've got that full feedback loop to know what the learner's going through, that's going to be the most important piece, is just to kind of close that. I will check the comments really quickly to see. We've got some yeses and some nos in the microlearning. Perfect. Well, I know I promised that we would not go the full hour. Oh, let me get rid of this banner. That would probably be helpful. But thank you. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you all today. Microlearning, and I know that this has been a topic we've now talked about for 30 minutes, but as a, where I am in my career, going through an onboarding program, going through continued education, the best trainings I've gone through, they're quick, they're fast, they're delivered in a way that I actually felt like I could watch and be not entertained by, because the point isn't necessarily to entertain, but I was bought in. I was drawn in for the content. I felt like, oh, I could see myself doing this. I see how this relates. And I'm speaking not only to my onboarding, at this role, previous roles, but in my own personal life, as you think through the type of video and the type of interactions you have on a day-to-day, that's what your workforce likely wants to engage with as well. It's whatever you gravitate toward in your personal life, whatever you gravitate toward in your day-to-day, that same can be applied to the workforce in a very, very impactful way. So look at what you like to view, look at the things you connect with, think through your learners. Those that joined the call today, I took a quick look, a lot of leaders in the L&D space that kind of what your learners want to see. Their jobs better than anybody else. You have the power to create content that resonates with them better than anybody else does. So take that knowledge, put it in front of them in a way that says, this is awesome. Not only are we teaching you the fundamentals of what you're going to need to do, or kind of these more complex ideas as you go, but it's in a way that, we know is going to be applicable to your day-to-day once you kind of graduate from these programs. And then last but not least, just keep flexibility around it. It's a moving target. Sometimes things change, and, the benefit of, these micro-learning programs is that you don't need to create this super complex curriculum right away. Start with what you have, start with your immediate needs, create the video, deploy it, have the interactivity, learn from that feedback loop, and then make your next couple of segments. And over time, what you'll see is not a rigid curriculum that kind of outlines like how to start your role, the day-to-day task, but you'll have this repository and this library of content that's actually really, really robust and changes as your business has changed. So, please don't hesitate to reach out. Drop my email there. I'll follow up with all of you with my contact information as well. But absolutely happy to chat with this in more detail. I'll hang out for a couple of minutes if anybody, is still around and wants to drop a comment. But other than that, have a fantastic Thursday. That's how you can tell it's been a crazy week. Have a great Wednesday. And for anybody watching in the future, excited to help out in your microlearning journey.